Merry Christmas everyone, or should I say Happy Solstice, because today we're going to be talking about A Court of Frost and Starlight. Now this book was a fun little Christmassy filler book, but it did have some of the old issues that I talked about in my last video. Now don't worry, I'm not going to go on and on and on and on about emotional impact because this is just a fun little novella. It's not meant to pack a big punch. But, of course, I will be talking about my icks again because there were several. But before we get into talking about my icks and the problems that I had with this book and the kind of rant review aspect, I'm just going to take a moment to be chill, share some of the things that I actually liked and appreciated about this book. It is Christmas after all. I actually, for the most part, kind of enjoyed this book. Every time I go into a new ACOFAS book, I do go into it knowing exactly what I'm going to get, knowing the characters, knowing that some of the language is a little bit icky, and you know, I kind of put my judgmental brain aside and try to enjoy it for what it is. I don't expect it to be the next great American novel. I just expect to spend a little bit of time in a fairy realm, see some weird fairy sex, and hopefully have some interesting plot developments happen. So I went into this book with some good faith, as I normally do with these books, to be fair. And the most magical thing happened. I started the book, I woke up the next morning and we had snow, lovely snow, which is very unusual for Exeter at this time of year. It was great because I got to be a bit of a basic bitch and take some nice pictures and videos of the book in the snow with the snow falling down. It was just immaculate vibes to read this book on a couple of really snowy days in Exeter. And once I finished this book, as magically as the snow had arrived, it melted and it dissipated back to the rainy, stormy weather of southwest England. But that magical snowy time, I'll always hold it in my heart because it actually helped me enjoy this book more than I believe I would have if I had read it on a different day. This book was just kind of a short novella, a little bit of fan fiction written by Sarah herself, about her characters just having a nice time at Christmas, more or less. We pick up a few months after the events of ACOFAS, and everyone's kind of settling back into normal life. They're trying to rebuild after the war, but there's been a lot of loss, there's been a lot of trauma. Some of the characters are still dealing with the effects of this, and they're also just trying to have a nice time together, get each other presents, share some appreciation after all they've been through. There's still some politics going on, there's some unrest in Devlon's camp or among the Illyrians. There's also some kind of echoes of rebellion or maybe people going across the Springcourt border into the human lands. This book kind of ties up the events of the last trilogy and introduces the events of Silver Flames and the war and stuff that might be to come. This is a really good transitional book to kind of close a chapter on the last trilogy, on Rhys and Feyre's story, but also open up Cassian and Nesta's story and the conflict that's going to be the crux of the next book or the next trilogy once the other books are published. I think it's good to take this time because otherwise they would have to do quite a lot of that in the next book. And I've not read it yet, so they might still spend a lot of time doing that. I know a lot of people say that you can just skip this book, but I don't know, I disagree. Having read it, I feel like I would be going into Silver Flames a little bit blind if I hadn't read it, a little bit lost as to where the characters have ended up. We get most of our chapters in the first person perspective from Feyre and Rhys's point of view, and it's about how they're dealing with the aftermath of the war, going towards the next war, and about how they're just spending some time together in their relationship and taking some next steps in their relationship. We also have some of Cassian's point of view from the third person perspective because the next book is going to be written in that different perspective. We get a tiny sliver of Nesta, although not much because I think Sarah's trying to keep some mystery around her character and why she is the way that she is. And we also for some reason get some chapters from Mor's point of view. This kind of talks about like the trauma that we've already talked about with Mor before, her reaction to it, and maybe setting up her going off and going on some mission out of the Night Court in the next books. I'm not sure if Mor's chapter really needed to be there. I think we could have just dealt with that in the next book, but it was fine. It was quite nice to hear from her perspective, I suppose. Don't know if her perspective is told in the next book at all. If it's not, then this is kind of random, not gonna lie. But yeah, I liked having this transition between switching our focus from Feyre and Rhys to Nesta and Cassian, and I feel a little bit more interested in Nesta and Cassian and their dynamic going forwards. I was a lot less grumpy about the idea of starting Silver Flames now that I've read this book, because I'm a little bit more in the mood for it, but I still haven't rushed into the next book. I am definitely giving myself a good few months off before I get into it because it's so huge. Both Cassian and Mor's chapters also introduced this idea that there are kind of some monsters out there in the Illyrian mountains and in the forests and stuff of the Night Court, some threats from within. I thought that was really intriguing. We didn't get much of it, but it did set up the next book well, and I'm a bit more curious to see about what these monsters are and what they want. We also hear that, is it Baraxis, is that his name? The demon thing from the library that is basically fear itself, he's gone missing after the war. So I think that's going to come up in the next book as well. There was a lot of like cozy little aspects to this book as well. They're going Christmas shopping, they're going around Valaris, Feyre's trying to get back into her art, they're doing a lot of admin and paperwork, and they're bustling around the house, they're making food, they're having wine, they're having a laugh together. They had a snowball fight at one point. Feyre has like some hot chocolate, so it's got that cozy kind of vibe to it as well. However, I'm going to get into some of my critiques now, and these critiques, the icks as well, kind of get into a territory that is not cozy, but we'll get there one thing at a time. Now, if you've not read the book, tune out now, because this is going to be packed full of spoilers and specific references, and it's a rant review. If you love this book, if you love this series, you don't like to hear people rant about it and yuck your yum, don't watch this part, maybe. Now that disclaimer's out of the way, let me get into my list. And by the way, this list might be a little bit chaotic. So I got the ick by page 14, legit. I made specific note of it. On page 14, we are in Rhys's point of view. And he's kind of at this military camp with Cassian, going about some like official business, some quite serious things. There's some like shit going on at camp. And can this boy not think about sex for like 1 second? They're doing this like very serious meeting, and then all of a sudden in his internal monologue, all he can think about is how he wants to be buried in Feyre. And he's sort of looking at the table in the cabin and he's like, oh, I just want to take her. I want to take her here and bury myself in her. And it comes like very out of nowhere, where he's like not with Feyre, he's just like doing this official meeting, and I'm like, oh, whoops, like time and place maybe. You'd think a 500-year-old Fae man would be not like a 14-year-old boy. And also someone who's allegedly such a feminist as Rhys comes across. He's very like, possessive and like, oh, I'm gonna take her and bury myself in her, blah. And it just makes me like uncomfortable. I just find it very off-putting. And then to make matters worse, on the next page he kind of talks about how, you know, thirsty he is for Feyre, and he says that on the way back from the House of Wind, when he was flying her down, he ended up just taking her then and there in the sky. He said he'd planned it for months, but then he was so horny basically that he just grabs her and like rips off her trousers and goes for it, and then they like nearly crash into this building, which is a bit of a dick move considering like a lot of the houses have been knocked down in the war and everyone's like trying to rebuild. And then Feyre just does like this husky laugh like and then he comes. And like obviously she's fine, she's laughing about it, but the way this was written of him just like losing control and like really going for it, just going in straight away, I just thought that was quite jarring and like a bit inconsiderate. I think like no matter how in love with your partner you are or how like horny you might be, most women, maybe Fae women are different, but most women like need a tiny bit more warming up than that. I think like suddenly being aggressively fucked in the sky is quite a niche taste, and if it was me, I would just like someone to maybe check in first before they tried some crazy move like this, even if it was like my soulmate mated bond man. It's just giving a little bit problematic to me. It's like she's his wife, therefore he can just touch her whenever he wants. And I know that's not how it comes across, because she's laughing and she's fine and she's not at all traumatized by this, but that doesn't mean that what he's done isn't like a problem, you know what I mean? So there's that. I just found it uncomfortable, didn't find it sexy. I'm just icked out and unimpressed. Also in this chapter, he kind of muses about her age and how she's only like 21 and he's 500, and like, why would she want to be with me? She's so young. It's like he's feeling a little bit insecure about it, and he's like quite rightly recognizing that there's like this power imbalance, yet still he behaves this way. Doesn't really add up. And then Cassian's like, well, your mum was like 16 and your dad was like 900, so, and that was fine. And then they just like don't address that or talk about it for the rest of the book. It's almost like Sarah J Maas like heard some criticism, similar to like the Twilight criticism of like, isn't it creepy that this like old man is with this like teenage girl or like young adult girl? And it's like Sarah's just gone, I hear you, the characters hear you, but it's fine and we don't care. So I'm like, okay, well, that's fine, I guess. Glad we had this conversation. It wasn't a waste of my time at all. And the context of this chapter of what Cassian and Rhys are doing there, yes, they're investigating like the like discontent within the camps, but they're also trying to enforce the fact that the females should be having fighting training, and they're coming up against like sexist attitudes of, well, the women should be like cooking while we train because we were all in the war, and they're like, well, the women were in the war too, so maybe the men could cook for a change. And then they're like, okay, I guess. And it's like, yay, thank you, our feminist kings. Thank you for advocating for women. But do Cassian and Rhys go home and cook dinner? No. Instead, the female servants and Elaine do most of the cooking. I feel like Sarah's trying to make us like these men or these males because they're progressive and they treat women right, and isn't that great? They let women have agency and choice and equality. But we still have this dynamic where, yes, they're letting women do this. They're allowing women to learn to fight. They're encouraging it. It's like the women are only free because the men allow it. And you know, I guess it's good that they are like in a position of power and they are using that power to advocate for women's rights. But the dynamic still feels like they're way up here on this pedestal. We don't see a lot of like genuine female agency. Like we might see Feyre or Mor taking agency, but it's only because the men in her life allow it. And when men like Tamlin or Eris take away their agency, they just have to be saved by Rhysand or Asriel or Cassian. Now I accept that I might be just being a little bit picky on this point. With the world that she's kind of created, this sexist kind of world, it's kind of hard for her to write her way out of it. And I know that women in oppressive systems can't easily just take agency and overthrow that. They do need men to help them. I think my real issue with it is just that the men are either terrible and oppressive, or they're like woke, woo, female empowerment, ooh, you can have choice, you can have agency, like perfect feminist men like Rhys, Cassian and Asriel. It's very black and white, and I really think Rhys and Cassian should actually have some sexist beliefs themselves and question it and challenge it within themselves. I really don't think it makes that much sense that Cassian and Rhys are so much more elevated than their Illyrian peers in this regard. It's justified in that, you know, their female family members have been killed, they've been victims of the sexist kind of culture. But because it's a sexist culture, surely everyone's female family members have faced similar trauma and similar treatment. So shouldn't more of the Illyrians be a bit more like sympathetic to women's causes and championing their rights? Why is it only our like three main powerful guys? So yeah, I think just like the logic of it doesn't quite make as much sense as I think that she thinks it does. And then a little bit later, a few chapters later, where in Cassian's point of view, he's up in the Illyrian mountains and stuff, and he meets this woman who runs a shop because her like male family member died, and she's had her wings clipped so she can't fly. And this is a very like thinly veiled metaphor for female genital mutilation. Trigger warning for this next part, by the way. This is a really inhumane cultural practice that really genuinely happens in the world. It removes women's ability to enjoy sex without removing their ability to have children, and it's absolutely horrendous and a complex cultural issue. Now, I get why she's making this like a practice in this Illyrian culture to demonstrate that it's really sexist at every level, that it's deplorable in certain aspects, but I'm really not sure this is the book to be diving into those topics. This is a very important and very sensitive and traumatic topic to discuss. A small, sexy Christmas novella about fairies doesn't seem like the medium to have this really delicate conversation. I'm sure Sarah really feels like she's doing something clever or something like good here and trying to raise the topic, raise the awareness for the topic. I know this series is supposed to be kind of dark and gritty and violent in many aspects as well as just fun and smutty, but this just doesn't feel like an appropriate analogy for the true topic to be getting into it now in this novella. Like, she touches on it in this chapter, but it's not really addressed again. Maybe it will come up in the future books, but it really does not need to be in this book is what I'm saying. I think this has the potential to be handled quite poorly, considering other aspects around sexuality or race or sexism is also handled kind of poorly in the series. And I really haven't heard anyone talk about this wing clipping aspect of this story. I think it probably went over people's heads. It was a really brief moment that we just moved past. It wasn't relevant to the book that they were reading. It's kind of like just in there for shock value, for you to be like, oh my god, how terrible. Woo, let's get back to our fun little Christmas smut. So personally, I feel like that could have been cut out. Maybe have it in a future book if you're going to handle it properly and appropriately, but not in the Christmas novella. Okay, it's like Reese talking about sex while he's in an important work meeting. Like, time and place, please. Time and place. Moving on from that, let's get on to some lighter topics again. We have this moment, I think it's in page 51. Reese is talking to Feyre about how he can never forgive Tamlin and he can never forgive Nesta for how she made her go out into the woods and hunt for her when she was a child. And Feyre's like, what about Elaine? And Reese is just like, Elaine is Elaine. Like, he's not mad at her because she's just so pathetic and like, she's just Elaine. She's fine. And again, I mentioned this in my other review. The babying of Elaine, this grown-ass woman, like, why do they treat her like this? What is wrong with her? I know she's like a sensitive soul and she's like a seer now as well, which she doesn't really talk about in this book, but I just don't get why everyone's got this Elaine is Elaine attitude. Something I completely forgot about in my last review that they did address in this book is that she actually killed the King of Hybern with Asriel's knife, like stabbing him through the throat. Such a shocking twist that I completely forgot about. I was like, oh really, did she? Maybe I like shouldn't have called her a wet wipe in my last review then. Whoops, sorry Elaine. But you know, even with her doing this, he's still like, Elaine's Elaine. So Elaine can do no wrong apparently, even though she's just as culpable as Nesta is in the treatment of Feyre when they were kids. So yeah, I'm not here for the Elaine enabling, I'm sorry. Moving on, a few more icks happened, and we got a lot of calloused hand descriptions again. We have a bit where Nesta's gloves scrape Cassian's calluses, so I think we can assume that in the next book, once we move into Nesta and Cassian's love, we're going to have more callous descriptions of hands, much to my dismay. And then we have this description from Feyre. She rakes her hands through Reese's hair and she savours the silken strands against her calluses. What are you talking about? Calluses are hard skin, like you can't really even like feel. That's kind of the point of calluses. So how is she like savouring the silken strands of his hair rubbing against her calluses? I don't know if like Sarah's ever had calluses. I've had calluses from like manual work and violin. They get kind of like raggedy, like they kind of tug on clothes fibres and things. I can't imagine like my calluses scraping someone's hair feeling like nice or sexy in any way. I really hope we stop with the calluses in the next book. I think when I read the next book, I'm going to do like a counter. I'm going to count the specific times that calluses or rasping laughs and breaths are mentioned, because it's the biggest book. I think it will be mentioned a few times. I think that's best to assume that it will be, because she has a real boner for calluses and I don't get it. I'm sorry. Then we have like Christmas Eve, Solstice Eve dinner, in which Amran brings up that she can't use the bathroom, like has still not figured out how to use the bathroom, and everyone's like giggling. They're like trying to withhold their laughs. They just find it so hysterical that she can't pee or whatever. And I'm just like, aren't you all like 500 years old? They're like, oh my god, Amran, I can't believe you haven't figured out how to pee yet. And I guess it's like a nice fun like jovial moment, but does it have to be about like pissing and shitting? Like, can Sarah not come up with something funny that is not toilet humour? Side note, like an ick that I didn't mention in my last video about the original trilogy, Feyre's bowels turn watery a lot as a description when she's scared. And like, please, please, can we not describe how her bowels turn watery? I'm begging you. Like, ugh. Can you not find a different way to say that she's scared? And it's not one time. She says the watery bowel thing a lot. More than once. Maybe 2 or 3 times at the least, at least. So please, no more toilet humour. I'm trying to have a nice time, okay? Speaking of childish, like, all of the boys just fuck off and go and play snowball fighting for like 6 or 7 hours on Christmas actual day. And like, it's kind of sweet, like they're kind of big children and they've been doing this for like 500 years. And it's their little tradition and they've not done it in a while because of all of the trauma and the war and the curses and shit. But the thing that really irked me about this is that he didn't tell Feyre. Bear in mind, Solstice is her birthday as well. He doesn't tell her. He gets like dragged out by Cassian and Asriel when they just fuck off. And she has no idea where they are. She's fine with this, by the way, for some reason, and she just kind of mooches around and chills out and like then does like some paperwork. Ugh, on your birthday and on Christmas or solstice or whatever the fuck, you're sitting doing paperwork? And it's not till like Mor wakes up and she's like, oh, they're like up at this lovely cabin, you know, the cabin that you love, playing snowball fights. They're going to be there till like dinner time. Till dinner time. If it was my birthday and my like first proper Christmas with my man, with my fae powers, in my city where I'm the high lady, I'd want to spend time with him. I'd want to at least be asked like, hey, by the way, all day until dinner time I'm gonna go and play with the guys. Is that okay with you? Maybe you would like to come and like spend time in the cabin maybe? Instead he just like leaves and then she does go to him, but like he would have just come back at like dinner time and she would have been like, oh hi. Like, she's just fine with it. I'd be so pissed off. I'd be like, what, you didn't tell me? Like, I'm kind of hurt. Like, I would have maybe liked to play snowballs. I'm like a high fae as well. I've got powers. I can play snowball. She has like can create snow and like frost because she's got winter court powers. She would have been badass in that snowball fight. If you really think women are equal race, maybe involve them in your snowball fights, because I get that they're like warriors and they're kind of playing snowball fights in this kind of warrior fashion, but Mor's a warrior, Feyre is kind of a warrior, like they could have played as well. It didn't have to be like such a boys club. So that like pissed me off. I'm sorry. I'd be like in a mood now, and I'm like not a moody person. I'm like pretty placid and pretty chill, but I would be in a mood. Like, at least tell me where you're going, asshole. But anyway, Feyre's fine with it, so I guess it's fine. Just like she's fine with being like low-key assaulted in the sky. She thinks it's all hilarious, so I guess it's not problematic. Then, as if the toilet stuff wasn't enough, we also get like a few pages where Sarah's talking about Feyre's periods now that she's a fae. She basically gets horrendous periods where she's bleeding and writhing in pain for days and days and days at a time, but only twice a year. I think Sarah's trying to like make a point of like, books never mention a woman's period, and so I'm going to. She kind of does the same in Throne of Glass. Like, there's a few chapters where Selena has period pain and she's kind of in bed and it's like, oh, I'm a badass assassin, but I still get my period because I'm a woman. And I feel like she's trying to do that here. I like get the point, but as someone that has periods, like personally I don't need to read about it to feel represented. So I'd be fine like not knowing that. It also begs a lot of questions, like if her cycle is 6 months long instead of 28 days, that means she only ovulates every 6 months as well. And like, does that mean that's how they don't get pregnant, because they can only get pregnant twice a year? And how long does ovulation last? I mean, our ovulation lasts like 5 days or so, where you can get pregnant, like at most. So does hers last like a whole month where she can get pregnant? And does that mean she's like in 3 months of follicular, 3 months of luteal phase, and then the period? So is she just like in a progesterone, her progesterone week is just like 3 months? I have so many questions about how this works. Questions that like Feyre doesn't seem to ask, because like later in the story she decides to have a baby with Rhys, even though they've been together a few months, like a year, and she'd initially said like, I don't want to have a baby right away, I want to enjoy my life a little bit. But over the course of the story she meets some traumatised people that have lost their husbands and everything, and she's like, oh, well, I wouldn't want to like lose him and not have our child, so I guess I'm going to have his child now, and this is really great. Kind of feels like she's making this decision like out of trauma and out of fear, which like each to their own, but I don't think that's the best reason to have a child. Personally, like Reese's point about him being 500 and her being like 21, I think she should think on that more and then maybe take some time to think about this, because they like to have sex in the sky and sex a lot, and having a baby, how long are phase babies, like if they've got this long life? Like you might have a baby or a toddler for like years and years, and I guess they can have nannies and stuff because they're rich, but like I don't know, I don't really think she's thought this through. Feels a bit like from trauma. But she's not thought through like the periods and the fertility aspect, because she's just like, it might not happen because it's very difficult. Why is it difficult though? Probably this is why it's difficult, right? So doesn't make sense. I guess we don't need to get into it. I think we're into it too much with the periods, to be honest, so we could be into it less. But it does beg the question. I'm a bit curious about how that works now. I'm sure she'll get pregnant super quickly. Maybe by the end of the next trilogy they'll have a baby, I'm sure. She also, as part of this, like addresses that like they have sex and then Reese doesn't take his contraceptive tonic the next morning. This doesn't make sense. Like, I like the fact that it's the men taking the contraceptive for once. I think like Sarah's trying to be feminist in that, but it's dumb. Like, it's dumb feminism, because if he was going to take something that would be contraceptive, surely he would take it before ejaculating, not like a whole 12 hours after ejaculating, because it's in Farah now. So what does him drinking a tonic do to his sperm that's in Farah now? You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, if the man's going to take it, it's not going to work the same way. Like, you can't just swap the sex and have the contraceptive the morning after pill or whatever work the same way as it does on a woman or a female. It's a little bit lazy. Like maybe come up with something else. Maybe it's like magic. Is it magic? It sounds kind of sciencey because he's drinking a potion. Like, I don't know. I have so many questions, but I guess I shouldn't think that deeply about it, because clearly Sarah's not thought that deeply about it either. And then one final point on the baby thing. So at the end of the book they have like a big smutty scene, which I'm sure like all of the readers that love the smut have been waiting for. It's fine. They kind of like have sex against the wall and then kind of mind meld in their mind. And right before this, Farah said that her gift for Christmas is that she wants to like give him a child, give him a baby. And I get that can kind of be like a romantic moment sexually, for people that want that. But the way they like bring this into it, she's not like, give me your sperm, like I'm gonna give you a child. What she does is she sends a picture of her child, which she knows what it looks like because the bone carver took his image, sends that image of the child into Reese's mind right before he comes, and then he like comes after seeing this child. And I just think that was like a bit of a bizarre choice. It was odd, made me uncomfortable. I didn't like it. Please Sarah, can we not do that? Can we keep the child out of it? Just yeah. No. Did it make anyone else uncomfortable? Actually, I hope it did. Otherwise I've got some questions. I think you can convey the romance of having a child with the man you love in a different way than that, in literally any other way than bringing child imagery literally into the picture. So let's move on from that. My final criticism of this novel, and it's kind of a big one, is the way they handle trauma. So a big theme of this book in general is trauma, how people are recovering from the war, how the characters are recovering from the war and the events of the last book. Farah and Reese both have trauma from the time with Amarantha and everything that's happened before, and from Reese like dying and coming back to life. But they kind of just deal with this, like they have the nightmares. Farah does some painting, she paints about her trauma, but it doesn't change her too much. She's nice to everyone around her. They're able to work, Reese goes to work, he's kind of his normal self. It doesn't impact him too much because I guess they're in love and they look after each other. Farah visits and does some charity work and tries to help people that are rebuilding after the war. And at the end, she builds this like art studio, starts this business where for free she takes children and adults, I think, to do like art classes, craft classes to help them deal with the trauma. And that's nice, that's all lovely. But then the way the characters handle other people that have trauma in not such nice, pretty ways, it's a confusing message about trauma. So like we have Tamlin. Tamlin's like a morally grey person. Like he's done some not so great things. And Rhys pays him some visits because he's not enforcing his border. And he's just like suicidal. He's a shell of a man. He can't care for himself. His house is a wreck. He has no one. He is literally at rock bottom. I'm surprised he's not killed himself, honestly. He's not doing well. And Rhys just comes along and like kicks him while he's down. Not saying he has to forgive him and that he can't hold him accountable, but like again, time and place. Lucian's right when he's like, maybe don't kick him while he's down. He is quite important. We do still need him. Like he's lost. Like he's dead. He's already dead. Leave him alone. Like it couldn't get worse for him at this point. Like just leave him alone. And a lot of the bad things that he has done, he did because of trauma. He wasn't doing those things before. I know there's a longer history of Rhys's mum and sister being killed, but Tamlin, you know, he kind of respectfully got rid of their wings, unlike his father. I can't even remember, honestly, the role Tamlin played, but I don't think he played a real central role in that. I think that was his father. But yeah, in general, Tamlin's crimes, while not excusable, it's coming from a place of trauma. And no one seems to really like acknowledge that it is trauma. He's just treated like an absolute irredeemable asshole. And that's kind of how you make a villain. I think Rhys's treatment of him is either going to make him kill himself or make him go full evil, because he really doesn't have anything good to live for anymore. And I don't think that just because Tamlin has done some bad things doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve some support and doesn't need some support. It's kind of like how you stop offenders from offending, right? By giving them some support, you can prevent them getting worse and maybe committing some more atrocities down the line. So it's not very wise to be treating him this way. If he actually had some support, I'm sure he'd probably be very sorry and try to make it up to them in some way, even though I appreciate Feyre doesn't want to see him, doesn't want to talk to him. And that's fine, but it's like the book saying it's okay to be traumatized and you deserve compassion and respect, but don't be traumatized like that, otherwise you deserve no respect and no compassion. And like, Tamlin's a morally grey character, so I get it to an extent, but then take Nesta as well. Nesta is treated the same way, and we see from our little snippet with Nesta that she's in a bad way. Like, she turned up at the solstice, but she was listening to like the crackling fire, and all she could think about was the cracking of her father's neck. And it's clear that even though she's gone there, she's spent the whole time kind of having traumatic flashbacks. She goes home, she doesn't even turn on the light, she doesn't turn on the fire because she can't deal with the sound. She's drinking, she's being promiscuous, she's living in absolute squalor, she's not eating. She's like an extremely mentally ill, traumatized person, and she's dealing with being a high fate and not being where she wants to be, not having any agency. She can't really leave Valaris, she can't go home, she can't really go to another court. She's really trapped and she's in a really horrible mental space. And yet everyone treats her like this pariah, and like she's so horrible. She's breaking Feyre's heart, she's breaking Elaine's heart by not coming along and being nice to people. And yeah, I guess they've maybe tried to help her a little bit and they paid her rent, but I don't think they are really getting her the help she needs. I don't think they appreciate how unwell she actually is. I think Cassian kind of loves and cares for her, but he doesn't get anything from her, and she's quite horrible and just treats him with disdain back, and he just kind of can't deal with this and so abandons her basically. Doesn't kind of keeps an eye on her while they walk home, even after he leaves her. But it's like everyone loves and cares for her, but no one is really doing much. They don't know what to do. I don't think they know how to handle her anymore. It's really quite a sad situation, and she's kind of viewed as a bit of a pariah, a bit of a bitch. Rhys doesn't really have any time for her. A lot of them couldn't care less. Like, they don't really have much time for her aside from Feyre, Elaine and Cassian. Amran's been a good friend to her. She's been talking to Amran, probably because she's got these extra powers that we don't quite know about fully yet, and that's good that Amron's been helping her to adjust. She's been like the only real true friend to her, honestly. And yeah, I get that people are frustrated with her. They love her. She's being horrible back. They don't know what to do. And this does sometimes happen with someone that's mentally ill that you care for. You sometimes feel like powerless and like you can't do anything. But like, is there any therapists? Is there any support in Valaris? Like, it seems like a progressive place that would have that. Isn't there something they can do for her? Again, it's like they accept why she could be sad and why she could be having a bad time. But they're like, oh, don't be sad like that. Don't be depressed like that. Or, well, it's been like a few months now. Like, this is going on for too long. Like, this can't go on. You know what? Healing doesn't happen on the timeline that you want sometimes. She is just going to take some time. It's kind of one of those things. It's not a good situation. And I've seen a lot of other reviews where they're like, I can't forgive Nesta for how she behaved at Solstice, and oh, she was such a bitch in this book, I hate her, blah blah blah. I don't understand why you can't have compassion, especially from seeing her little snippet and her just sitting in the dark, not eating, getting these traumatic flashbacks. I think it makes total sense why she is suffering the way that she is, and that, you know, people have trauma. You should have compassion for people that have trauma. Sometimes people don't always behave in this perfect way that you would like. Having mental illness isn't pretty. It doesn't make you a great person. It can make you a bad person to be around. It can make you act in ways that aren't so great, and that is just part of it. Not every mental illness is like tragic and beautiful and you're suffering. Going through trauma, having a mental illness, it can be ugly sometimes, and I think this book does display that ugliness quite well, but I don't think it teaches us much as readers to be compassionate to people even when they behave in ugly ways because of their mental illness. And that could have been quite a nice Christmassy message for the book, but we didn't really get that. I hope Nesta finds some healing in the next book. I'll be reading to find out, you know, in a few months when I'm in the mood to go into it with good faith. I hope she gets better, and I hope that some of the relationships can begin to heal a little bit after everything that's happened. So that was my review. This was a long review, maybe the longest review I've done for the shortest book. But I hope you liked it. Consider it a Christmas gift. Hope everyone has a lovely Christmas. If you're watching this after Christmas, hope you had a lovely Christmas. If you want to get me something for Christmas, subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave comments, engage with me. This YouTube thing is hard. I'm struggling to get eyes on my video, eyes on my channel. Anything you can do to help me out. If you like this video, if you like me, if you like the review, please do. I would really appreciate it. Have a happy holidays, whatever you celebrate if it's not Christmas. And thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye!